Hello and welcome to my channel. This is Creepy Dread, your storyteller of choice. Today I have a long compilation for you with all the previous videos, so you can snuggle up under your blanket and fall asleep. And remember to like and subscribe so I can keep doing this in the future. I would really appreciate more interaction with you listeners. Thank you. Enough talk, and let's dive in. I wish you a good night. When I was a child, I lived in a bizarre little house. It was incredibly tall and thin, like an attached house, except freestanding with 3 floors, a basement, and an attic. The house was full of quirks that gave it an unusual charm. 2 fully functional fireplaces, a shower stall in the center of the basement, and a backyard so small you could barely take 5 steps without hitting the fence. But perhaps the most peculiar feature was the old rope-pulled dumbwaiter that led from the kitchen up to my bedroom. I loved that weird little place, with its creaking floorboards and mysterious corners. Felt like living inside a giant puzzle box. But as charming as it was, the house was incredibly old, and the repair costs soon became too much for my parents to handle. Eventually, we had to make the difficult decision to move. Preparing for the move was a monumental task. I packed most of my things myself, throwing some of them down the dumbwaiter for fun, and cramming all my clothes into the closet until they formed a solid brick of fabric. While clearing out that closet, I stumbled upon something I had never noticed before, a hidden attic entrance in the roof. Being the curious kid I was, I couldn't resist the temptation to explore. I climbed up, using the clothes as a makeshift ladder, and pulled myself into the attic for my first and last exploration of the topmost part of our strange little house. The first thing I noticed was that it wasn't as dark as I had expected. The attic was strung with old red Christmas lights that still glowed faintly, casting a sinister crimson light over everything. A dozen cracks and holes in the floorboards offered glimpses into the bedrooms below, adding to the eerie atmosphere. The attic was set up for habitation. Someone had gone to great lengths to make it livable. The insulation was plasticed away, and there was an old gurney piled with sleeping bags and sheets. In one corner, a rusted mint green refrigerator hummed softly. Out of curiosity, I opened it and was surprised to find that it still worked. But it was the third thing I noticed that sent chills down my spine. Bones. There were bones everywhere. A lot of bones. As a kid, I didn't have a great understanding of anatomy, but I could tell these bones came from all sorts of creatures. Small bones, large bones, clean and white, piled haphazardly into heaps around the center of the attic. Some of the piles were blackened, as if someone had tried to burn them, and the walls nearest those piles were scrawled with dark, charred messages. Most of the writing was just smears, but one word stood out clearly among the chaos: sorry. It appeared multiple times, scrawled in a hurried, desperate manner. My heart pounded in my chest as I took in the disturbing scene. I realized that for 8 years while I slept below, this macabre collection had been sitting right above my head. I scrambled back down, my mind reeling with fear and confusion. I tried to make sense of what I had seen, but there were no easy answers. I didn't tell my parents about the attic. I wasn't sure they would believe me, and a part of me wanted to pretend it was just a bad dream. The memories of that attic haunted me for years. I often wondered who had lived up there and what they were doing with those bones. Why the word sorry was scrawled over the walls, and why they had left everything behind. To this day, I'm not sure what really happened in that attic, but the experience left me with a deep sense of unease. So if you ever find yourself in a strange old house, take a moment to wonder what might be hiding just out of sight. I would like to tell you about my girlfriend who talks in her sleep. At first, it was adorable and made for great stories to share with friends. It was always harmless nonsense. Things like, the sky is folding, or we need to raise the ground. We'd laugh about it the next morning, and I'd ask her if she remembered her dreams. She never did. Her sleep talking was a source of amusement, something light-hearted in our lives. But now, I wish she'd just stay silent. What happened last night has changed everything. Every night we have our little routine. We start by cuddling, but eventually it gets too hot, and we settle into our usual positions, back to back, each on our own side. She always falls asleep before I do, so I get the full show of her nightly musing. I used to love hearing what she'd say in her dreams, eager to share her bizarre sleep talk with our friends. But last night, it became something I never want to hear again. It was around 11 p.m. She was already asleep, and I was still up, reading a book. We were back to back when I heard her mumble something under her breath. It was too faint to understand, so I leaned over to look at her face. She was sleeping peacefully, so I returned to my book, thinking nothing of it. As I got absorbed in the pages, I eventually drifted off to sleep. The next thing I knew, I was jolted awake by the sound of her talking, loud and clear. I opened my eyes, and at some point in the night, we had both turned to face each other. Her eyes were wide open, staring straight at me, just inches away from my face. But those eyes, they weren't seeing me. It was like she was looking through me, her gaze hollow and unsettling. Her eyes were terrifyingly wide, as if she was trying to stretch them to see everything all at once. These were the eyes I fell in love with, but now they scared the hell out of me. My heart was pounding, adrenaline rushing through my veins as I threw off the covers and jumped out of bed. As I moved, her eyes followed me, but her body remained still. I told myself maybe it was the book light, keeping her awake, and maybe she'd said, "Can you please turn that off?" But something was wrong. Her eyes darted from me to the wall, to the door, and then the ceiling. I dared to ask her, "Are you all right?" No response, but those eyes locked onto mine when I spoke. Her breathing was steady, that slow rhythm of someone deeply asleep. And then, while looking right at me, she said in a voice too deep to be hers, "I'm back to bed, dearie." She'd never called me dearie before. We had pet names, sure, Pumpkin, Baby, Cupcake. But dearie sounded like something from a different era, something my grandmother might say. I needed more information before climbing back into bed with a possibly possessed girlfriend. "Are you awake, sweetie?" I asked. No response. Her eyes darted around again, landing back on me. Just as I was about to leave the room, her eyes rolled back into her head, showing only the whites. It was chilling in the dim light, and she insisted, "Of course I'm awake. Come back to bed," tapping her fingers on the comforter. Looking at her hands, I thought maybe she was awake. They were moving, right? But no, her fingers were splayed in odd directions, as if she was trying to simulate control, but failing. Those weren't my girlfriend's hands. I said, "I'm gonna get a drink of water, baby. Be right back. Can I get you anything?" I planned to run the moment I was out of the room, but she wasn't having it. In that deep, chilling voice, she said, "Take one step out of that door, and I will rip out your throat and shit down your neck." I was shocked, but knew I had to keep my cool. I replied, "As interesting a proposition as that is, I think I'm going to." And I grabbed my water bottle from the nightstand. She started screaming, a high-pitched, bird-like shriek that pierced the night. It felt like the neighbors 3 houses down could hear it. As fast as I could, I unscrewed the lid and doused her with water. Like some kind of magic, her eyes closed, her fingers relaxed, and she slipped back into a peaceful sleep. I'm sleeping on the couch now, maybe forever. She'll understand when she wakes up. Maybe it was just a nightmare, a glitch in her sleep cycle. But whatever it was, I'm not taking any chances. And remember, sometimes the ones we love the most are the ones who can scare us the most. It was a normal night. I was upstairs in my room, completely engrossed in my video games. The volume was cranked up, drowning out the world around me. I was in the zone, laser focused on the screen, when something broke through my gaming trance. I thought I heard noises coming from downstairs. At first, I dismissed it, assuming it was just the game or maybe the house settling. But the unease crept in. So, I muted the TV and listened closely. Nothing, just silence. I shrugged it off, went back to playing, thinking it was all in my head. Another hour passed, and then I heard it again, louder this time. There was no mistaking it. Something was definitely off. I was starting to freak out. My heart was pounding as I made my way downstairs to the basement, convinced that's where the sound was coming from. I hesitated at the door, every instinct screaming to turn back. But I had to know. As soon as I opened the basement door, a cold breeze washed over me, sending a shiver down my spine. I descended the stairs, and my heart sank when I saw the basement window wide open. I was 100% sure I had closed and locked all the windows before, Panic surged through me, and I was ready to bolt out of there when something stopped me in my tracks. That's when I noticed it. The closet door was slightly cracked open. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, frozen in fear, my mind racing. I had to know what was inside. With trembling hands, I moved closer and reached for the doorknob. My heart was pounding in my chest when suddenly, a creepy crackle came from inside the closet. I've never moved faster in my life. I sprinted up the stairs, locked the door, and grabbed my phone. My hands were shaking as I dialed 911, praying they'd arrive in time. The cops arrived quickly, faster than I could have hoped. They moved through the house with precision, checking every corner. My heart was still racing when I heard a gunshot from the basement. Minutes later, they emerged with a deranged-looking man, probably homeless, clearly unwell. They told me they'd opened the closet door and found him inside. He'd had a gun and fired at them, but thankfully, he missed. The cops disarmed him and took him away. The scariest part? How close I came to opening that door myself. If I had, I might not be here to tell the tale. It's terrifying to think that danger was lurking just beyond that door, waiting for me. Let this story be a reminder to always trust your instincts and stay vigilant. You never know what's hiding in the shadows. Stay safe. It's 2:49 a.m., and I'm lying awake in bed, staring into the shadows. I'm on my right side, feeling the weight of the night pressing down on me. My wife is behind me, and I can sense her eyes on my back, a silent stare that sends a chill down my spine. She's always been a night owl, but tonight, something feels off. Her presence is different. It's unsettling. Her breathing is heavy, rhythmic, but with a strange edge that sets my nerves on fire. I know I should turn around, ask her if she's okay. But fear roots me in place, like I'm trapped in a nightmare, where moving isn't an option. Minutes tick by, and now it's 3:03 a.m. I feel her shifting closer, inch by inch. Her hand brushes the back of my hair and my skin crawls. Why is her touch so cold? I can sense the door to our room in the dark, just a few feet away. Every instinct screams to jump up and bolt for it, but I stay put, trying to convince myself I'm just being silly. It's 3:13 a.m. now, and she's so close I can feel her breath on my neck. It's rancid, like decay, nothing like the warm, familiar scent I know. Panic sets in as something hard presses against my back. It's not sharp, but the weight of it is suffocating. Is it a knife? My mind races as terror grips me. I gather every ounce of courage, ready to spring up and flick on the light, when suddenly the hallway outside our room is illuminated. I hear footsteps on the stairs, familiar, hurried steps. It's my wife. She's on the phone, her voice trembling with tears. She's talking to her mom, and I catch snippets of her words. Something about her grandpa. He passed away earlier today. He never liked me much. Always seemed to look right through me. That's when it hits me. The realization settles in like ice in my veins. Whatever was behind me wasn't my wife. It wasn't something living. It was something else. Something that had slipped between the world of the living and the dead, perhaps with a message of malice, or maybe just to deliver a final, unwanted farewell. I sat there, trembling, trying to make sense of it all. My mind was racing, a whirlwind of fear and confusion. How could this be possible? I listened to the hushed murmur of my wife's voice from the hallway, her sorrow-filled words a stark contrast to the terror I just experienced. Her footsteps paused outside the bedroom door, and I watched as her silhouette lingered in the dim light. Her voice dropped lower, as if she sensed that something wasn't right, and she turned the doorknob with slow deliberation. She stepped inside, her eyes meeting mine with a mix of worry and confusion. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I wanted to tell her everything, but the words stuck in my throat like shards of glass. I glanced toward the window, half expecting to see something lurking in the shadows, but there was nothing there. Just the gentle sway of the curtains in the night breeze. But the room felt different, charged with an energy that was both unsettling and inexplicable. "Did you hear anything earlier?" I asked, my voice shaky, betraying the fear that lingered in every corner of my mind. She shook her head, her expression shifting from concern to disbelief. She moved closer, placing a comforting hand on my shoulder, her touch warm and real, a stark contrast to the cold presence that had haunted me moments before. "It must have been a dream," she suggested, trying to reassure me, though doubt flickered in her eyes. But it didn't feel like a dream. The memory was too vivid, too raw. I could still feel the phantom pressure on my back, the chill of breath on my neck. My heart pounded with an inexplicable sense of dread. A soft knock at the door interrupted us, pulling our attention away. My wife and I exchanged glances, her eyes mirroring my own uncertainty and fear. The door creaked open, revealing nothing but the empty hallway. Yet the air seemed to hum with a whisper, a sound too faint to comprehend. It was like an echo from another time, another place, carrying with it a sense of foreboding. In that moment, we stood together, facing the unknown as a united front. The house was still, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were not alone. There was a presence here, one that transcended our understanding, a lingering specter of the past, watching, waiting. Back in August 2020, I woke up one morning feeling strange, disoriented. Before I knew it, I had collapsed, vomiting blood all over the place. Panic ensued as I was rushed to the hospital. The doctors quickly discovered that I was on the brink of death. A massive stomach ulcer had been silently bleeding, filling my stomach with blood. In those moments before emergency surgery, I was terrified. I didn't know if I was going to make it. Thoughts of my kids flashed through my mind, and I couldn't shake the fear of never seeing them again. While lying there, trying to come to terms with my fear, a woman entered my room. She was different from everyone else, dressed entirely in black, unlike the nurses or any other staff. Her presence was calming yet strange. She looked at me with kind eyes and asked, "Are you doing okay?" I nodded, trying to put on a brave face. Then she asked, "Are you scared?" Her voice was soothing, and despite my fear, I felt a strange sense of peace. I admitted, "Yes, I am. I'm not religious, but in that moment of desperation, I wanted any help I could get." She asked if she could pray for me, and I said, "Yes, please." I don't remember the exact words of the prayer, but I remember feeling a warmth, a sense of comfort. She finished the prayer, looked at me, and said, "Everything is going to be okay. I'll see you later." Then she left, disappearing into the corridors of the hospital. I spent 17 days in that hospital, slowly recovering. As the days passed, I thought about that woman. She never returned, and none of the hospital staff seemed to know who she was. It wasn't until I was back on my feet that it hit me. She wasn't dressed like anyone else in the hospital. Who was she? What was she? I hadn't been given any pain medicine or sedatives at the time, so I knew it wasn't a hallucination. 3 years have passed, and I still can't shake the feeling that this encounter was more than just a chance meeting. Was she an angel? A ghost? Or something else entirely? Her presence remains a mystery, an enigma that lingers in the back of my mind. In the heart of Georgia, there stands a relic of the past that has withstood the ravages of time. The old Lawrenceville jail. Its weathered stone walls and rusted iron bars have borne silent witness to the history of a time long gone. Yet the stories from within those walls continue to live on, whispering tales of injustice and sorrow. One legend, in particular, stands out among the rest. The haunting story of Alec and Betsy, whose tragic fates have left a mark on the town's history. In 1848, life was harsh and unforgiving for Alec and Betsy, two souls bound together by love and hardship. As slaves on a sprawling plantation, they had endured the worst humanity could offer. Yet they found solace in each other's presence. Their small cabin on the edge of the plantation was their refuge from the harsh realities of life, a place where love bloomed, despite the chains of oppression. Alec was a strong man, both in body and spirit, whose determination and resilience inspired those around him. Betsy, his beloved wife, possessed a quiet strength, her gentle nature masking an indomitable will. Together they faced each day with courage and hope, dreaming of a future where freedom was not just a distant dream. But their lives were shadowed by the ever-present threat of their master, a cruel and volatile man known for his drunken rages. His name was Thomas Grayson, and he wielded power over his slaves with an iron fist. The plantation was his domain, and those who lived there were subject to his whims and desires. One fateful night, as the moon hung low in the sky and the crickets sang their mournful song, the tranquility of Alec and Betsy's cabin was shattered. Thomas Grayson, inebriated and filled with a malevolent rage, stormed through the door, his eyes wild and dangerous. He staggered toward Betsy, his intentions clear. Alec's protective instincts kicked in, and he placed himself between Betsy and the master, his heart pounding with fear and determination. "Stay away from her," Alec warned, his voice steady despite the terror that gripped him. Grayson sneered, his words slurred and venomous. "You dare defy me, boy?" he spat, lunging at Alec with drunken aggression. The struggle that followed was fierce and desperate, chaotic dance of survival and defiance. Alec fought with every ounce of strength he possessed, driven by love and the need to protect his wife from harm. As the confrontation escalated, the two men stumbled and grappled, their movements a blur of violence. In the heat of the moment, Grayson chased Alec up a ladder that led to the loft of the cabin. The small space was filled with shadows and dust, the air thick with tension. As they struggled, Grayson's foot slipped on the wooden beams, and with a cry of anger and surprise, he lost his balance and plummeted to the ground below. Alec watched in horror as his master lay motionless on the floor, the life gone from his eyes. The realization of what had happened settled over him like a shroud, the weight of the moment pressing down on his shoulders. In the silence that followed, Alec's mind raced with fear and uncertainty. He knew the consequences of what had happened, the unforgiving reality of the world they lived in. But he also knew that he could not run from the truth. With a heavy heart, he made the decision to turn himself in, hoping for justice and mercy. As the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, Alec made his way to the sheriff's office in town, his footsteps echoing on the cobblestone streets. He walked with his head held high, his heart pounding with each step. He knew the odds were stacked against him, but he had to try to explain what had happened. Inside the sheriff's office, Alec faced Sheriff Matthews, a stern man with a reputation for upholding the law without mercy. Alec recounted the events of the previous night, his voice steady as he described the struggle and Grayson's fatal fall. "It was self-defense," Alec pleaded, his eyes searching the sheriff's face for any sign of understanding. "I didn't want to hurt him, but I had no choice." Sheriff Matthews listened, his expression unreadable. When Alec finished, the sheriff sighed heavily, his eyes filled with regret. "I believe you, Alec," he said, his voice tinged with sorrow. "But the law is the law, and you know how it is in these parts." With those words, Alec was taken into custody, his fate sealed by the cruel realities of the antebellum South. The trial of Alec was swift and brutal, a mockery of justice in a world that favored the powerful over the oppressed. Despite his impassioned plea of self-defense, the verdict was never in doubt. The jury, composed of white landowners and peers of the late Thomas Grayson, viewed Alec as nothing more than property, and his defense fell on deaf ears. The courtroom was filled with tension, the air thick with anticipation and judgment. Alec stood tall and resolute, refusing to show fear in the face of adversity. He knew the outcome was predetermined, but he held on to a flicker of hope, a belief that perhaps justice could prevail. Betsy watched from the gallery, her heart heavy with fear and anguish. She knew the world they lived in, knew the injustices that plagued their lives, but she clung to the love they shared, hoping it would be enough to carry them through the storm. As the judge delivered the guilty verdict, a murmur of approval swept through the courtroom. Alec's fate was sealed. He was sentenced to hang for the murder of Thomas Grayson. The world spun around him, a blur of voices and faces as the reality of his situation sank in. Alec was taken to the old Lawrenceville jail, a foreboding structure of stone and iron that loomed over the town like a specter of the past. The jail was cold and unforgiving, its walls echoing with the cries of those who had come before. In his cell, Alec found solace in his memories, holding on to the love he shared with Betsy and the moments of joy that had brightened their lives. He sang to himself in the quiet hours of the night, his voice a mournful melody that resonated through the walls of the jail. His song was a testament to his spirit, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, hope and love could endure. The other prisoners listened in silence, their own hearts aching with the knowledge that they, too, were trapped in a world that offered little mercy. As the day of Alek's execution approached, the atmosphere in the jail grew tense and somber. The townspeople gathered outside, eager to witness the grim spectacle that had become all too familiar in their lives. On the morning of the execution, the sky was gray and overcast, a reflection of the sorrow that hung over the town. Alek was led from his cell, his hands bound and his head held high. He walked with dignity, refusing to let fear overshadow his final moments. As he stood on the gallows, his eyes met Betsy's in the crowd. Her face was a mask of grief, but her love shone through the tears, a beacon of light in the darkness. Alek drew strength from her presence, knowing that their bond could never be broken. In his final moments, Alek sang once more, his voice rising above the murmurs of the crowd. It was a song of love and defiance, a haunting melody that echoed through the streets and carried his spirit into the beyond. In the years that followed, the legend of Alek and Betsy continued to grow, passed down through generations as a tale of love and injustice. The townspeople spoke of Alek's song, a mournful melody that could still be heard echoing through the walls of the old Lawrenceville jail. Many claimed to hear his voice on quiet nights, a ghostly lament that sent shivers down their spine. Some said it was a warning, a reminder of the injustices of the past, while others believed it was a tribute to the enduring power of love. Betsy, too, became a symbol of strength and resilience, her unwavering love for Alek inspiring those who heard her story. She remained in the town, dedicating her life to helping others and fighting for justice in a world that so often denied it. As the years passed, the legend of Alek and Betsy became woven into the fabric of the town's history, a reminder of the past and a beacon of hope for the future. Today, the old Lawrenceville jail stands as a testament to the history and struggles of those who came before. Visitors from near and far come to explore its haunted halls, drawn by the stories of ghosts and echoes of the past. Tour guides recount the legend of Alek, their voices reverent as they speak of the tragic events that unfolded within the jail's walls. They tell of the mournful song that still lingers in the air, a haunting reminder of a time when justice was denied and love was tested. Many who visit claim to feel a presence in the jail, chill that creeps down their spine and whispers of the past that brush against their consciousness. Some say they hear Alek's song, a ghostly melody that resonates through the corridors and speaks of a love that refused to be silenced. For those who take the time to listen, the legend of Alek and Betsy offers more than just a tale of ghosts and hauntings. It is a story of courage and resilience, two souls who refused to be broken by the injustices of their time. In their love, Alek and Betsy found a strength that transcended the barriers of race and oppression, a bond that endured even in the face of unimaginable hardship. Their story serves as a reminder of the power of the human spirit, a testament to the enduring hope that lies within us all. As the legend continues to be told, it serves as a call to action for those who hear it, urging them to stand against injustice and fight for a world where love and equality can thrive. The tale of Alek and Betsy has left an indelible mark on the town of Lawrenceville, a legacy that continues to inspire and resonate with those who encounter it. Their story has become a symbol of hope and resilience, a reminder that even in the darkest times, love can shine through. Through their lives and their struggles, Alek and Betsy have shown that the fight for justice is never in vain, and that the bonds of love can withstand even the greatest of challenges. As the legend of Alek and Betsy lives on, it serves as a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit, a reminder that even in the face of adversity, hope and love will always find a way to prevail. And so, the echoes of Alek's song continue to resonate through the halls of the old Lawrenceville jail, a haunting melody that speaks of the past and offers a vision of a brighter future where justice and love reign supreme. In the small, sleepy town of Ravenwood, there was an old house that everyone avoided. It was known as the Holloway Mansion. The mansion had been abandoned for decades, ever since the Holloway family mysteriously vanished one cold winter night. People said that the family had been cursed, and now their spirits roamed the house, whispering their regrets to anyone who dared to listen. One autumn evening, a young woman named Emma moved to Ravenwood. She was a journalist and had heard the rumors about the Holloway mansion. Intrigued, she decided to investigate the old house for a story. She hoped that her article would reveal the truth behind the ghostly whispers and bring closure to the town's mystery. Emma arrived at the mansion just as the sun was setting. The house was enormous, with broken windows and ivy creeping up its walls. The once grand entrance was now a gaping maw of decay. Emma took a deep breath and walked up the creaking steps to the front door. She hesitated for a moment, but her curiosity won over her fear. The door swung open with a groan, and Emma stepped inside. The interior was just as she had imagined: dusty furniture covered in white sheets, cobwebs in the corners, and a heavy silence that seemed to press down on her. She turned on her flashlight, casting eerie shadows on the walls. As Emma walked through the house, she noticed strange things. Old portraits of the Holloway family lined the walls, their eyes seeming to follow her as she moved. The air was cold, and the house seemed to be holding its breath. Emma felt a shiver run down her spine, but she pushed forward. In the library, Emma found an old journal on a dusty desk. The leather cover was cracked, and the pages were yellowed with age. She opened it carefully, revealing the diary of Thomas Holloway, the head of the family. The entries were filled with descriptions of strange occurrences: flickering lights, cold drafts, and whispers in the dark. The last entry was particularly unsettling. "The shadows are getting closer. I can hear them whispering my name. I fear they want something from us." Emma's heart raced. She could feel the weight of the journal's words. As she continued reading, she heard a faint whisper behind her. She spun around, but there was no one there. The whispering grew louder, a soft, almost soothing murmur that seemed to come from all around her. She tried to ignore it and moved to another room. The whispering followed her. It seemed to be saying something she couldn't quite make out. Emma's flashlight flickered, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. The temperature dropped, and her breath became visible in the cold air. Suddenly, Emma heard a loud bang from the floor above. She froze, listening intently. The whispering stopped, replaced by the sound of footsteps echoing through the house. She decided to investigate the source of the noise. Her footsteps echoing as she climbed the stairs. The second floor was even darker. Emma's flashlight barely pierced the gloom, and the shadows seemed to grow thicker. She followed the sound of the footsteps to a door at the end of the hallway. It was slightly ajar, and a faint light flickered from within. Emma pushed the door open slowly and stepped inside. The room was a small bedroom, furnished with an old, dust-covered bed and a rocking chair. The flickering light came from a single candle on the bedside table. Emma approached the candle, her eyes scanning the room. Suddenly, the candle's flame wavered and went out. The room was plunged into darkness. Emma's heart pounded as she fumbled for her flashlight, but it slipped from her hand and rolled away. The whispering returned, louder and more insistent. It filled the room with a haunting melody, growing closer and closer. Emma tried to stay calm. She felt her way around the room, searching for her flashlight. The whispers were now almost a roar, and she could feel a cold presence pressing in on her. Just as she was about to give up, her hand touched the flashlight. She quickly turned it on, and the beam cut through the darkness. The room was empty. The whispers had stopped. Emma was sweating and shaking, took a deep breath and decided it was time to leave. She turned to the door, but as she did, she saw something in the corner of her eye, a shadowy figure standing by the window. Emma gasped and backed away. The figure was indistinct, shrouded in darkness, but it seemed to be watching her. The shadow moved, and Emma saw it extend a hand towards her, as if beckoning her to come closer. Fear gripped her, but she forced herself to move. She hurried out of the room and down the stairs, her footsteps pounding as she fled the house. She could still hear the whispering, growing fainter as she reached the front door. She burst out into the cold night air, gasping for breath. Emma looked back at the mansion. The windows seemed to glow with an otherworldly light, and the whispers had turned into a mournful wail. She knew she had to leave Ravenwood and never return to the Holloway mansion. The next day, Emma wrote her article, but she didn't include the whispers or the shadowy figure. She described the mansion as an eerie, decaying house with a tragic history. The article was published, and it caught the interest of many readers, but the true nature of the Holloway mansion remained a mystery. Emma left Ravenwood and never spoke of her experience again. The mansion remained abandoned, a dark secret hidden within its crumbling walls, and though the townspeople continued to avoid it, some still claimed they could hear the whispers of the Holloway family on quiet, moonlit nights. To this day, if you stand outside the Holloway mansion late at night, you might just hear the faintest of whispers carried on the wind, as the shadows continue to tell their stories in the darkness. The Wilson family had been planning their camping trip for months. They were looking forward to a weekend away from the hustle and bustle of city life, surrounded by nature and the peace it promised. Jim and Lisa Wilson, along with their 2 children, Emma and Jake, packed up their car and headed out early Friday morning. The drive to the remote campsite took them deep into the woods, away from the noise and chaos of everyday life. The winding roads and thick forests only added to the sense of adventure. As they arrived at the campsite, the sun was shining brightly, casting a warm glow over the sparkling lake nearby. The air was fresh and filled with the scent of pine. Wilson set up their tent in a small clearing and spent the day enjoying the great outdoors. Emma and Jake splashed around in the lake, their laughter echoing across the water. Jim and Lisa watched from the shore, happy to see their children so carefree and content. Later, they all went for a hike through the forest, marveling at the beauty and tranquility of the place. As evening fell, the family gathered around a campfire. They roasted marshmallows and told stories, their faces illuminated by the dancing flames. It was a perfect day, and they went to sleep that night feeling grateful for the time together. The first night passed peacefully, and the family awoke refreshed and ready for another day of adventure. Something had changed. As they prepared breakfast, a sense of unease hung in the air. Emma and Jake began to argue over trivial things, their voices rising in frustration. "I want to go home," Jake whined, crossing his arms defiantly. "Me too," Emma chimed in, her usual cheerful demeanor replaced by a frown. Lisa and Jim exchanged puzzled glances, unsure of what had caused the sudden shift in mood. They managed to calm the children down and encourage them to enjoy the day. "We came here to have fun, remember?" Jim said, trying to lift their spirits. Reluctantly, Emma and Jake agreed, and the family spent the day swimming, exploring, and trying to recreate the magic of the previous day. But the sense of unease lingered, like a shadow that refused to be shaken. As darkness fell, family retreated to their tent, hoping for another peaceful night. But as the forest around them fell silent, Lisa found herself unable to sleep. It was then that she heard it. Soft, creeping footsteps outside the tent, accompanied by a low, demonic panting that sent shivers down her spine. She held her breath, listening intently, trying to convince herself it was just the wind or a passing animal. But the noises grew louder, and Lisa's heart began to race. It wasn't just one creature. There were several, circling the tent, their footsteps light but purposeful. Suddenly, something hit the side of the tent with a force that made Lisa jump. She stifled a scream, her mind racing with fear. She shook Jim awake, her voice barely a whisper. "Jim, wake up. There's something outside." Jim groggily opened his eyes, but the noise outside made him instantly alert. The creatures began to hit the tent more aggressively, their laughter echoing in the night like a cruel mockery. The children woke up, fear etched on their faces as they clung to their parents. The tent was under siege, the creatures outside relentless in their attack. The laughter grew louder, more maniacal, as if they were feeding off the family's terror. Jim tried to remain calm, his mind racing for a solution. "Stay together," he whispered, his voice shaking. "We'll wait until they leave." But the creatures showed no signs of leaving. Instead, they grew bolder, their blows to the tent more forceful, their laughter a nightmarish sound that seemed to come from all directions. Lisa held Emma and Jake close, trying to shield them from the terror unfolding around them. She whispered soothing words, even as her own fear threatened to overwhelm her. The night stretched on, the family trapped in their tent, surrounded by the malevolent presence outside. Every sound seemed amplified, every laugh a reminder of their helplessness. As dawn approached, the laughter began to fade, the creatures retreating into the shadows from which they came. The silence that followed was deafening, leaving the Wilsons shaken and exhausted. With trembling hands, Jim unzipped the tent, peering out into the morning light. The campsite appeared untouched, the forest calm and serene, as if the night's horrors had been nothing more than a bad dream. But the Wilsons knew better. They quickly packed up their belongings, eager to leave the place behind and never return. The drive back home was silent, each family member lost in their thoughts, the memory of the night haunting them. They had come seeking peace and adventure, but instead found something far darker. Once home, they vowed never to speak of what had happened, each hoping that time would erase the memories of that terrifying night. But in the quiet moments, when darkness fell and the wind howled outside, they would remember the laughter and the creatures that had surrounded them, a reminder of the unknown horrors lurking in the remote corners of the world. Anna Carter wasn't one to shy away from an adventure. As a tech-savvy individual who thrived on urban exploration, she often sought out derelict sites in her city, hoping to uncover the hidden stories etched into the walls of forgotten structures. Her friends, however, never accompanied her on these outings, opting instead for more conventional activities. But Anna didn't mind. The solitude made her explorations feel like personal quests. It was on one such expedition that Anna stumbled upon the old Winthrop building. Located on the edge of town and hidden behind a veil of overgrown trees and rusty chain-link fences, the building had been vacant for years, shrouded in mystery and forgotten by most. Yet what caught Anna's attention wasn't the building itself, but rather an odd, flickering Wi-Fi signal on her phone, labeled "Come Find Me." The Wi-Fi signal was strange. Anna knew that abandoned buildings rarely, if ever, had working utilities. Yet here was a beacon calling to her, urging her to explore. It was almost as if the building was alive, the digital pulse beating beneath decaying surface. Curiosity piqued, Anna decided to investigate. Entering the building, Anna found the air thick with dust and decay, floorboards creaking beneath her feet. The hallways stretched before her like a labyrinth, shadowy and unwelcoming. Despite the creeping unease, she felt a thrill of excitement. She had stumbled upon something potentially significant, something that promised more than just the usual urban decay. She followed the strength of the signal deeper into the building, her phone serving as a makeshift compass. The air grew colder as she approached the heart of the structure, and the signal's intensity increased with each step. Finally, she arrived at a small room with a single unassuming wooden door slightly ajar. Pushing the door open, Anna found herself in a room stripped bare of any furnishings. The walls were peeling, and a single, grimy window allowed a trickle of light to filter in. In the center of the room stood a dusty old computer atop a rickety wooden desk. The monitor hummed softly, and the screen glowed with a warm, inviting light. The Wi-Fi signal was at its strongest here, its presence palpable and unsettling. Anna hesitated, sensing a warning deep in her gut. But curiosity, that relentless force, pushed her forward. She approached the computer and sat in the chair, its old springs groaning under her weight. The screen displayed a single prompt: "Enter your name." With a slight tremor in her hands, Anna typed her name. The screen flickered, and a series of strange characters filled the display. Her phone vibrated violently in her pocket, startling her. When she glanced at it, she found it displaying the same bizarre script. Her phone's screen flashed again, this time showing a simple text message: "Welcome, Anna. Let us play a game." As she stared at the message, an icy sensation crawled up her spine. It felt as though unseen eyes were watching her, their gaze penetrating the walls of the decrepit room. Suddenly, the room's temperature dropped sharply, her breath visible in the frigid air. The computer screen flashed, revealing a series of images, each more disturbing than the last. Ghostly figures, shadowy hands reaching out from the darkness. and twisted faces contorted in silent screams. Anna tried to turn away. Something compelled her to continue watching. The images blurred together, forming a nightmarish montage that seemed to penetrate her mind, peeling back layers of her consciousness to expose her deepest fears. Her heartbeat quickened, pounding loudly in her ears. The computer screen went dark, and for a moment, the only sound in the room was Anna's ragged breathing. Then, the monitor flickered back to life, displaying a new message. "Find me, Anna. I'm waiting." A sense of dread washed over her. She felt trapped, as if the room itself were a cage, the shadows closing in around her. Despite her growing fear, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had to see this through. She rose from the chair and stepped back into the hallway. The air was colder now, the shadows longer and deeper. As she moved through the building, the Wi-Fi signal continued to guide her, its presence a sinister beacon in the darkness. The further Anna ventured into the building, the more distorted reality seemed to become. The walls appeared to breathe, pulsing in time with the flickering lights overhead. Whispering voices echoed through the corridors, their words unintelligible, yet filled with malice. In one room, Anna found a mirror, surface cracked and tarnished. As she peered into it, she saw a reflection that wasn't her own. The image showed a version of herself that was older, gaunt, and haunted. The eyes staring back at her were filled with despair, and when the figure smiled, its teeth were sharp and predatory. Panicking, Anna turned away from the mirror and stumbled back into the hallway. The whispers grew louder, mocking her, taunting her with secrets only they knew. Desperation clawed at Anna's mind as she continued to wander the labyrinthine hallways. It felt as though the building was shifting around her, altering its layout to confound and confuse. Each room she entered held its own horrors, from phantom apparitions to grotesque visions that defied explanation. As she tried to make sense of it all, her phone vibrated again. This time, the message was more urgent. "You're running out of time, Anna. Find me before it's too late." Anna realized with a jolt that she was no longer just an explorer. She was a participant in a twisted game, one where the stakes were her own sanity. The realization filled her with a renewed sense of urgency. She had to find the source of the signal and end this nightmare. Driven by a mix of fear and determination, Anna finally reached the building's basement. The air was damp and heavy, the walls slick with moisture. The Wi-Fi signal was strongest here, a tangible presence that seemed to seep into her very bones. At the far end of the basement, she discovered a door with no handle, its surface etched with strange symbols that glowed faintly in the dim light. As she approached, the door slowly creaked open, revealing a room bathed in a sickly green glow. Inside, a figure stood with its back to her, silhouetted against a bank of flickering computer screen. The screens displayed the same twisted imagery she had seen earlier, a never-ending cycle of horror. Summoning her courage, Anna called out to the figure. It turned slowly, revealing a face that was disturbingly familiar. Her own. The doppelganger smiled, its eyes void of humanity, filled instead with a malevolent intelligence. The doppelganger spoke, its voice a distorted echo of Anna's own. "You found me, but this is just the beginning. The internet is a doorway, Anna, a gateway to the darkest corners of the mind." As the words sank in, the room began to spin, the images on the screens blurring together into a kaleidoscope of terror. Anna felt herself being pulled into the vortex, her sense of self unraveling like a frayed thread. She tried to resist, to hold on to her identity, but the pull was too strong. As she succumbed to the darkness, she realized that she had become part of the building, a new ghost in its haunted halls, forever trapped in the cycle of horror. Anna Carter was never seen again, her disappearance a mystery that only added to the legend of the Winthrop building. The Wi-Fi signal continued to beckon, a silent siren call to those who dared to venture too close. The building remained, a monument to the unknowable horrors lurking just beneath the surface of the digital world. Steve had always been a fan of horror stories, just like you who are listening to this right now. There was something about the thrill of being creeped out in your own home that he found very stimulating. So when he discovered a podcast dedicated to scary stories, he thought it would be the perfect way to fall asleep. Little did he know that this decision would turn his nights into a nightmare. It started on a typical Monday night. After a long day at work, Steve lay in bed, earbuds snugly in place, ready to unwind with the latest episode. The narrator's voice was soothing, lulling him into a state of relaxation as he recounted tales of haunted houses, malevolent spirits, and cursed objects. As the first story unfolded, Steve felt his eyelids grow heavy. He was just drifting off when he heard a faint noise, a soft whisper that seemed to echo from somewhere within his room. At first, he dismissed it as his imagination, a trick of the mind brought on by the eerie story. But the whisper came again, more insistent this time. It was a voice, low and unintelligible, threading through the narrative like a sinister undertone. Steve sat up, pulling out his earbuds and glancing around the room. His bedroom was silent, bathed in the soft glow of the street lamp outside. Shaking off the unease, he lay back down and resumed the podcast. Yet, as the narrator continued, the whispers persisted, weaving in and out of the story with increasing clarity. Steve could almost make out words now, dark and foreboding, like a warning he couldn't quite grasp. The next night, Steve found himself hesitating before pressing play. The strange whispers had left him feeling unsettled, but curiosity got the better of him. He was determined to understand what was happening, convinced that there was a logical explanation. As the story unfolded, Steve became aware of another noise, soft footsteps, padding across the carpet. He froze, every muscle tense, straining to hear. The footsteps circled his bed, slow and deliberate, as if something unseen was prowling the darkness. His heart pounded in his chest, a drumbeat of fear. He flicked on the bedside lamp, casting light into every corner, but the room was empty, as still and silent as ever. Steve chuckled nervously, attributing the noise to the podcast playing tricks on his mind. On the third night, Steve tried to convince himself that it was all in his head. He settled into bed and pressed play, determined to enjoy the story without succumbing to his imagination. The narrator's voice was smooth and captivating, drawing him into a tale of a long-abandoned asylum and the horrors that lingered within. As the story progressed, Steve felt a chill in the air, an icy breath that caressed his skin and raised goosebumps along his arms. He pulled the blankets tighter, trying to ignore the creeping dread that seeped into his bones. Then he saw it. A shadowy figure standing at the foot of his bed. It was a dark silhouette, featureless and ominous, watching him with an intensity that made his skin crawl. Steve's breath hitched in his throat, and he blinked rapidly, hoping it was just a trick of the light. But the figure remained, shifting slightly as if it were stepping closer. Panic surged through Steve, and he lunged for the lamp, flooding the room with light. The figure vanished instantly, leaving him trembling and alone in the illuminated room. By the fourth night, Steve was exhausted. He had spent the day reassuring himself that it was all just his imagination, but the fear lingered, an unwelcome companion that refused to leave. Despite his apprehension, he returned to the podcast, unable to resist the pull of the unknown. The story was darker this time, a tale of demonic possession and the terror it wrought upon an unsuspecting family. Steve felt the air grow heavier with each passing minute, pressing down on him like a weight. The whispers returned, louder and more distinct, their words twisted and malevolent. As the narrator's voice droned on, the room seemed to close in around him, the shadows stretching and distorting into grotesque shapes. He could feel a presence hovering just out of sight, watching him with cold, unfeeling eyes. A sudden crash shattered the silence, and Steve bolted upright, his heart racing. The sound had come from the hallway. A loud and violent disturbance echoed through the stillness. He stumbled out of bed, fear gripping him tightly as he crept toward the door. Steve reached the hallway, his hand trembling as he flicked on the light. The corridor was empty, the doors closed and undisturbed. Yet the sense of being watched was stronger than ever, an invisible gaze piercing through the darkness. A shadow moved at the edge of his vision, darting down the stairs. Steve hesitated, fear and curiosity warring within him. Driven by an inexplicable urge, followed, the darkness closing in around him. He descended into the gloom. The air was frigid in the living room, the temperature plunging as he stepped into the shadows. Steve could see the outline of a figure standing just beyond the reach of the light. its form shifting and indistinct. "Who are you?" Steve's voice was hoarse, barely a whisper in the oppressive silence. The figure didn't respond, but the whispers filled the air, a chorus of voices speaking in a language he couldn't comprehend. Steve backed away slowly, his mind racing. He knew he had to stop this, to break whatever connection the stories had forged with the darkness that had invaded his home. In a moment of clarity, he ripped the earbuds from his ears and threw the phone across the room. The whispers ceased instantly, the air clearing as if a fog had lifted. The figure remained, watching him with silent intensity. Steve could feel its power waning, the grip of the darkness loosening. He turned on every light in the house, banishing the shadows to the corners. The figure faded, its presence a memory that lingered just out of reach. Steve knew he couldn't stay there, not with the remnants of the horror still clinging to the walls. The following day, Steve packed his things and left, determined to put the nightmare behind him. He vowed never to listen to scary stories again, the allure of the unknown tainted by the terror he had experienced. As he drove away, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed within him, a darkness that lurked just beneath the surface. But he pushed the thought aside, focusing on the road ahead and the promise of a fresh start. Yet, deep down, Steve knew that the shadows would always be there, waiting for the moment when he would let his guard down. And in the quiet moments between wakefulness and sleep, he could still hear the whispers, echoing softly in the recesses of his mind. Jack had always been drawn to places long forgotten by the world. As an urban explorer, he found a strange beauty in abandoned buildings, each telling its own story of time, neglect, and mystery. Armed with a camera and a flashlight, Jack ventured into these lost places, hoping to capture their secrets. When Jack heard about the abandoned Ravenwood Psychiatric Clinic, his curiosity was piqued. The clinic had been closed for decades, shrouded in rumors and ghost stories that warned people away. But for Jack, those stories were an invitation, a challenge he couldn't resist. Early one Saturday morning, Jack arrived at the clinic, its imposing structure looming against the gray sky. Vines crawled up the crumbling walls, and broken windows stared out like hollow eyes. The air was thick with decay and the scent of rain-soaked earth. Jack made his way inside through a broken door, its footsteps echoing in the vast, empty lobby. The clinic was silent, save for the distant drip of water and the rustle of leaves in the wind. He took a deep breath, savoring the sense of adventure that tingled in his veins. He wandered through the dark, narrow corridors, his flashlight beam cutting through the shadows. The walls were covered in peeling paint and graffiti, remnants of those who had come before him. Dust motes danced in the air, stirred by his passage. As he explored, Jack imagined the patients who once inhabited this place, their lives confined within these walls. The thought sent a chill down his spine, a reminder of the dark history that lingered here. After hours of exploring the upper floors, Jack felt an irresistible pull toward the basement. He found a staircase at the end of a long corridor, the steps descending into the darkness below. Hesitation flickered through his mind, but curiosity won out. The basement was colder, the air damp and heavy. His flashlight revealed long, shadowy corridors lined with doors, each leading to rooms filled with forgotten equipment, decaying furniture. As Jack ventured deeper into the basement, he began to hear faint noises, footsteps and voices, distant but unmistakable. He paused, listening intently, his heart pounding in his chest. Who could be down here? Driven by a mix of fear and intrigue, Jack followed the sounds, his footsteps cautious and silent. The noises grew louder as he moved closer, echoing through the empty halls. At the end of the corridor, Jack discovered a large hole in the wall, as if something had burst through from the other side. The opening revealed a narrow passage that sloped downward, the air colder and thicker the further he went. Jack hesitated, but the thrill of discovery urged him on. He stepped through the hole, finding himself at the top of a long staircase that spiraled into the darkness below. The voices were clearer now, chanting in a language he couldn't understand. He descended the stairs cautiously, the air growing colder with each step. As he reached the bottom, he found himself in a large, cavernous room illuminated by the flickering glow of torches. The sight before him was like something out of a nightmare. A group of people dressed in pitch-black robes stood in a circle, their faces hidden by hoods. They chanted in unison, their voices rising and falling in a chilling rhythm. In the center of the circle lay a stone altar, stained dark with something Jack didn't want to imagine. Symbols and markings covered the floor, drawn in a substance that glistened ominously in the torchlight. Jack's heart raced as he watched, a mix of terror and fascination holding him in place. He raised his camera, capturing the scene in a series of photos and videos, each click of the shutter echoing in the silence. As he crept closer, hoping to get a better view, his foot slipped on the damp stone, sending a small rock skittering across the floor. The sound cut through the chanting, drawing the cult's attention like a spotlight. The chanting stopped abruptly, and the robed figures turned toward Jack, their faces hidden in shadow. Panic surged through him as he realized he'd been discovered. He stumbled backward, nearly dropping his camera as he fumbled for a way to escape. "Who dares to disturb our ritual?" a voice demanded, cold and sharp. It was a woman, her voice resonating with power and menace. Before Jack could respond, the cult members rushed toward him, their movements swift and coordinated. Fear propelled him into action, and he turned and ran, sprinting back up the stairs with the cult hot on his heels. Corridors blurred past as Jack ran, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Cult's footsteps echoed behind him, relentless and unforgiving. He pushed himself harder, adrenaline coursing through his veins. He took twists and turns through the clinic, his mind racing as he searched for an exit. The building felt like a maze, each hallway looking the same as panic threatened to overwhelm him. The cult was gaining on him, their footsteps growing louder with each passing second. Jack's heart pounded in his chest, his fear driving him forward even as exhaustion began to set in. In his frantic search for escape, Jack made a wrong turn and found himself trapped in a dead-end corridor. He skidded to a halt, his heart sinking as he realized there was nowhere to run. Before he could react, the cult members closed in, surrounding him with their dark presence. Their eyes glinted with malice from beneath their hoods, and Jack felt a chill run down his spine. "You've seen too much," the woman from before said, stepping forward. Her voice was calm, almost gentle, but it carried an undercurrent of danger. Jack backed away, his back hitting the wall as fear clawed at his mind. "Please, I didn't mean to." "Silence," the woman snapped, cutting him off. "You have trespassed where you do not belong." The cult members seized Jack, their grips unyielding as they dragged him back down into the depths of the clinic. He struggled against them, but they were too strong, their numbers too many. They led him back to the cavernous room where the altar awaited, its surface cold and foreboding. Jack's mind raced, searching for a way out. The cult had him pinned, their intentions clear. As they forced him onto the altar, Jack's mind reeled with horror. The chanting resumed, the voices rising in a sinister crescendo. The woman stood over him, a ceremonial dagger in her hand, blade glinting wickedly in the torchlight. Fear threatened to paralyze him, but survival instincts kicked in. Desperation fueled his action as he struggled against his captor, his heart pounding in his ears. With a burst of adrenaline, Jack managed to break free from their grip, his movements fueled by sheer terror. He lashed out, catching one of the cult members off guard and sending them stumbling backward. Chaos erupted as he fought his way out, his determination to survive giving him strength. He dodged and weaved through the cult, his focus on the exit and escape from this nightmare. He ran with every ounce of energy he had left, his breath ragged and his heart pounding. The corridors flew by in a blur as he made his way back through the clinic, cult's shouts echoing behind him. Bursting out into the daylight, Jack didn't stop until he reached the safety of his car. He fumbled with the keys, his hands shaking, and finally managed to start the engine. Driving away from the clinic, Jack's mind was a whirlwind of fear and disbelief. Images of what he had seen played over and over in his mind, a haunting reminder of the darkness lurking beneath the surface of the world. He drove until he was far from the clinic, until the fear began to ebb and the adrenaline faded. He pulled over to the side of the road, his hands gripping the steering wheel as he tried to steady his breathing. The camera sat on the passenger seat, a reminder of the evidence he had gathered. He knew he had to tell someone, to warn others about the cult and their terrifying ritual. But the thought of going back, of facing that darkness again, filled him with dread. In the end, Jack decided to share his story anonymously, hoping that it would be enough to keep others away from the clinic and the horrors it held. He never returned to urban exploring, the thrill of discovery tainted by the memory of that fateful day. And as the sun set on the horizon, Jack knew he would never forget the forbidden asylum and the secrets it had revealed, secrets he would carry with him for the rest of his life. It all started on a Friday night in late September, just as the leaves were starting to turn. I was a college sophomore, living off campus in a quiet neighborhood. Most of the other students were partying that night, but I had decided to stay in and catch up on some reading. My apartment was on the ground floor of a 3-story building, nestled between 2 much taller buildings that blocked most of the light from the street lamps. It was a cozy place, just a small living room, a tiny kitchen, a bathroom, and my bedroom. I liked it because it was quiet and felt like a little hideaway from the world. That night, I was curled up on the couch with a novel when I heard a faint tapping noise. At first, I thought it was just the wind rustling the branches of the old oak tree outside. But then it happened again. A distinct, deliberate tap, tap, tap on the glass of my living room window. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. It was probably nothing, I told myself. Maybe a bird had flown into the window. But I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. Summoning my courage, I got up and walked slowly to the window. I peeked through the curtains, expecting to see nothing but the dark, empty street. Instead, I saw him, a man standing just outside the window, his face partially obscured by the shadows. He was tall and thin, with unkempt hair that fell over his eyes. He wore a faded hoodie and jeans that looked like they hadn't been washed in weeks. His eyes were locked onto mine, and his lips were curled into a chilling smile. My stomach dropped, and I stumbled back, nearly tripping over the coffee table. I wanted to scream, but my voice was stuck in my throat. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, my hands shaking so badly I could barely press the buttons. 911, what's your emergency? The operator asked, her voice calm and steady. There's a man outside my window, I whispered, terrified he might hear me. Can you describe him? She asked. I gave her a quick description, my voice trembling. She assured me that officers were on their way and told me to stay on the line. I hung up the phone and glanced back at the window. The man was still there, his eyes never leaving mine. He pressed his hand against the glass, as if testing to see if he could get inside. The minutes felt like hours as I waited for the police to arrive. I huddled on the floor trying to stay out of sight, my heart racing with fear. Finally, I heard the wail of sirens approaching. Red and blue lights flashed outside, and I heard the sound of car doors slamming. I peeked out the window and saw 2 police officers approaching the man. They shone their flashlights in his face, and for a moment, he seemed to snap out of whatever trance he was in. He turned and ran, disappearing into the darkness between the buildings. The officers chased after him, but he was too quick. They returned a few minutes later, empty-handed, but they assured me they would keep an eye out for him. After they left, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. I kept checking the windows and doors, making sure everything was locked tight. I barely slept that night, jumping at every sound. The next morning, I called my landlord and asked if we could install security cameras around the building. He agreed, and within a few days, I had a state-of-the-art security system in place. But even with the cameras, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every time I walked home from class, I felt eyes on me, and every time I heard a noise outside, I was convinced it was him, coming back to finish what he'd started. I started taking different routes to and from school, constantly looking over my shoulder. One evening, about a week after the incident, I found a note slipped under my door. It was written in a messy scrawl, and my blood ran cold as I read it. You looked so pretty last night. I can't wait to see you again. I called the police, but there was little they could do without any real evidence. They advised me to be cautious and to report any further incidents immediately. Terrified, I decided to stay with a friend for a while. I didn't want to be alone, not with that creep still out there somewhere. My friend lived in a large apartment building with a doorman and security cameras everywhere. I felt safer there, but I knew I couldn't hide forever. A few weeks later, I moved to a new apartment in a different part of town. It was a bit more expensive, but it had better security, and I needed to feel safe again. I didn't tell many people where I was moving, just in case. It's been a year since that night, and I still get chills every time I think about it. I'm more cautious now, always making sure my doors and windows are locked, and I'm always aware of my surroundings. I never saw the man again, but sometimes I still feel like I'm being watched, like he's out there somewhere, waiting for the right moment to strike. I just hope that moment never comes. Remember, sometimes the scariest monsters are the ones we can't see. Stay safe out there. About 2 years ago, I found myself driving home late at night after a family reunion. It was a long drive, around 2 hours on roads flanked by thick, suffocating bushes and trees. The kind of roads that could easily be a setting for a horror movie. I had to get back for work the next day, so I didn't stay overnight. And as the night wore on, the exhaustion started to hit me hard. You know that feeling when suddenly you're hit with an overwhelming wave of sleepiness, like someone flipped a switch? That's exactly what happened to me. My eyes were drooping, and no matter how much I tried to shake it off, I knew I couldn't keep driving safely. But finding a place to pull over felt impossible. The road was empty, and every inch of it was shrouded in darkness and dense vegetation. So in a desperate move, I decided to pull over to the side of the road onto the grass, hidden behind some bushes. I made a mental note of the time, 11:22 p.m., before drifting off into a fitful sleep. The car's engine was off, and the world outside was a shadowy blur. I was jolted awake by a scratching sound against the car. I glanced at the clock, 11:50 p.m. The noise stopped after a few seconds, and despite the growing sense of unease, I was so exhausted that I simply turned over and tried to get back to sleep. But the scratching sound returned, and this time it didn't stop. I looked at the clock again, 12:40 a.m. My heart started racing. Why would an animal return after almost an hour? I peered in the rearview mirror and caught a glimpse of something darting away into the forest. That moment, I couldn't shake the image of the hook killer from the urban legend. You know the one. Scratches on the car, killer lurking nearby. I was out of there faster than you could say nightmare. I sped down the road, desperate to put as much distance between me and whatever was out there. Just around a bend, I saw a car parked off to the side with the driver's side door open. I slowed down to take a look, and to my relief, there was no one inside. But as I looked back in my rearview mirror, that's when things took a turn for the worse. Out of nowhere, a man came sprinting around the corner, waving his arms and screaming, Hey you, get the fuck out of your car, now." His voice was frantic, almost guttural. My heart pounded in my chest as I floored the accelerator and sped off into the night. I didn't look back. I couldn't afford to. My mind was racing, a maelstrom of fear and adrenaline. I sped through the darkness, my eyes straining against the heavy night. The road seemed endless, each shadow and curve amplifying my dread. I was determined to put as much distance between myself and that terrifying encounter as I could. The next few miles were a blur. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see headlights following me or the shadowy figure from before. But nothing. The road behind me was clear, though the feeling of being watched never left. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel, and I could feel sweat trickling down my back. I tried to focus on the road ahead, desperate for any sign of civilization. Eventually, I came to a small gas station with a few flickering lights. The neon sign outside buzzed weakly, casting an eerie glow over the empty parking lot. I pulled in, the tires crunching over the gravel. My heart was still racing, but I was finally able to catch my breath. I figured I'd take a moment to calm down and gather my thoughts before continuing the drive. I got out of the car, the cold night air hitting me like a slap. I walked over to the gas station store, my footsteps echoing in the stillness. The place was deserted, but I didn't mind. I just wanted to buy a cup of coffee and a moment of peace. As I waited for the cashier, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I glanced around the store, my eyes darting from shelf to shelf. That's when I noticed something strange. There was a stack of newspapers on the counter, and one of the headlines caught my eye. It read, "Local man missing, last seen driving late at night." Felt a chill run down my spine as I saw a photo of the missing person. He looked strikingly similar to the man who had screamed at me. My mind raced, trying to piece together the unsettling connection. I bought the coffee and hurried back to my car. I couldn't get out of there fast enough. As I was about to drive away, I noticed something else. My side mirror was cracked. It was a small detail, but in that moment, it felt like a sinister omen. I tried to push the thought from my mind and focused on getting home. The drive from the gas station was unnervingly quiet. I kept expecting something to happen, but nothing did. I finally pulled into my driveway just as dawn was breaking. Exhausted and frazzled, I went inside and collapsed into bed, but sleep didn't come easily. My dreams were plagued by shadows and screams, and I woke up several times, heart pounding. I spent the next few days on edge, constantly checking over my shoulder and avoiding late-night drives. I kept thinking about that newspaper headline and what it meant. Was the man I saw connected to the missing person? Was he trying to warn me, or was he something far more sinister? I decided to dig deeper into the case. I found out that the missing man was indeed last seen on the same stretch of road. The investigation had turned up little, and the case was still open. I also learned that several other people had reported strange encounters in that area. Scratching sounds, odd figures in the woods, and unsettling messages. It seemed I wasn't the only one who had experienced something terrifying there. Now, whenever I drive late at night, I'm always cautious, especially on isolated roads. I can't shake the feeling that there's something in those woods, something that watches and waits. Maybe it's just my imagination running wild, or maybe there's something darker lurking in the shadows. Either way, the fear of that night still lingers. So, if you ever find yourself on a deserted road late at night, remember my story. Trust your instincts, stay alert, and never let your guard down. Sometimes, things that go bump in the night are more than just the stuff of nightmares. I've been a social media influencer for a few years now. It's been a fun and exciting journey, sharing my life and connecting with thousands of people worldwide. But a few months ago, something happened that made me wish I'd never started this whole thing. It started with an innocent-looking comment on one of my Instagram photos. It was a picture of me at a local coffee shop, smiling over a latte. One of the comments stood out from the usual mix of hearts and compliments. "Hope you enjoyed your vanilla latte. Did you know they put extra syrup in it just for you?" That might sound harmless, but the thing is, I never mentioned what kind of drink I had. I brushed it off, thinking it was just a lucky guess from someone who knew me well. Then, the messages started. First, they were friendly, like a fan trying to strike up a conversation. "I saw you at the park yesterday. Loved your outfit." Again, I hadn't posted anything about being at the park. My stomach churned with unease, but I told myself it was just a coincidence. I mean, I did go to the park a lot, and it wasn't unusual for fans to spot me in public. But then the messages became more specific, more invasive. "How's your cat feeling? She seemed a bit under the weather yesterday." I had never posted about my cat being sick. That's when I started to panic. Someone was watching me, following me closely enough to know these intimate details. I decided to do some digging, trying to find out more about the account sending these messages. It was a fan account, filled with pictures of me, some of which I'd never seen before. They were taken from strange angles, almost like someone had been hiding while snapping them. I blocked the account, hoping that would be the end of it. But it wasn't. A few days later, a new account popped up with a direct message. "Why did you block me? I'm just trying to be friends." Attached was a photo of me inside my house, sitting on the couch. My heart skipped a beat. I felt sick. No one else was home, and this picture was taken from outside, through the living room window. I called the police, but they couldn't do much. They advised me to keep my doors and windows locked and to be careful about what I posted online. I hired a security company to install cameras around my house, hoping it would deter whoever was doing this. But things got worse. I woke up one morning to find a note slipped under my door. "You looked so peaceful last night. I watched you sleep." I couldn't take it anymore. I packed a bag and went to stay with a friend across town. I didn't tell anyone where I was going, not even my closest friends, but somehow the messages continued. "Nice change of scenery. Hope you're feeling safer." That was when it hit me. Whoever this was, they weren't just following me. They were inside my accounts, monitoring everything I did. My phone, my laptop, even my smartwatch. I was being tracked. I went to a tech-savvy friend for help, and they confirmed my worst fears. My accounts had been hacked. The stalker had access to my location, my messages, everything. We spent hours going through every device, scrubbing them clean, changing passwords, and setting up new security measures. But the damage was already done. I felt violated, my privacy shattered. I decided to take a break from social media, deleting all my accounts. The messages stopped, and I finally started to feel a little safer. After a lot of work, my friend and I managed to clean my devices and set up a strong new security system. I finally felt like I had a little control back. For a while, things were quiet. The messages stopped, and I felt a bit more at ease. But the fear was still there, lingering in the back of my mind. Every time I walked past a window or heard an unexpected noise, my heart would race. One evening, I was sitting on the couch when I noticed a flashing light outside. I peeked through the curtains and saw the police pulling up to the house across the street. A few moments later, I received a text from my neighbor. "They got him. The guy who's been stalking you. He was hiding out in the abandoned house 2 blocks over." My heart skipped a beat as relief washed over me. I couldn't believe it. They had actually caught him. The police told me that he had been using stolen equipment from a nearby tech company to hack into people's devices. He had been following me for months, using my own technology against me. Knowing he was in custody brought a sense of peace I hadn't felt in a long time. It would take time to feel completely safe again, but at least now I could start rebuilding my life without the constant fear of being watched. I eventually returned to social media, but this time I was much more cautious. I never let my guard down again. Technology can be a double-edged sword. Stay vigilant and take steps to protect your privacy. A few years ago, I decided to take a walk through a part of the woods I'd never explored before. It was the kind of path you'd only find if you wandered off the beaten track, where the trees were thicker and the shadows seemed to swallow any hint of sunlight. The air was filled with the usual earthy scents of decay and moss. But then, something strange happened. I caught a whiff of something overpoweringly sweet, a smell so sickly and cloying that it almost made my stomach churn. It was as if someone had spilled an entire vat of syrup in the middle of the forest. Naturally, my curiosity got the better of me. I pushed aside the undergrowth, and there, hidden beneath a tangle of branches, was a sight I'll never forget. The body was barely recognizable. It had clearly been there for weeks, maybe even months. The flesh was bloated and discolored, a grotesque mix of green and black. It was swollen, with various grotesque fluids seeping out. The local wildlife had made quite a feast of it, leaving behind a macabre scene of nature's cruelty. I did the responsible thing and called the police. They instructed me to stay with the body until they arrived. It was in the middle of nowhere, so I had a long wait ahead of me. As the daylight faded, I was left alone with the corpse, enveloped in the encroaching darkness. The woods grew silent, save for the occasional rustling of leaves and distant cries of nocturnal creatures. The darkness seemed to press in on me, and time felt like it was dragging. The air grew colder, heavier, and there I was, sitting there, just a few feet away from the decaying body. The night was filled with a palpable sense of dread. I kept expecting something, or someone, to emerge from the shadows. When the police finally arrived, they confirmed what I had feared. The man had committed suicide. It was a tragic end to a tragic life. But for me, that was not the end of the story. The real horror began after that night. For weeks after, I was plagued by nightmares. In my dreams, the man's face would emerge from the darkness, twisted in anger. He would speak to me, not with words, but with a forceful presence that screamed of rage and bitterness. His ghostly figure would accuse me of disturbing his final rest, of intruding upon his chosen end. In these dreams, his message was always the same. He wanted me to suffer, to end my own life. It was relentless, haunting me at every turn. Even though I knew it was just my imagination running wild, the intensity of the nightmares made them feel all too real. Tonight, as I type this out, I can't shake the feeling that he's still out there. Maybe he's watching, waiting to slip back into my dreams and remind me of that awful night. It's a disturbing thought, knowing that a piece of that darkness still lingers in my mind. Sometimes I wonder if we disturb the dead, or if they disturb us. I suppose some mysteries are better left buried, and some horrors are best left in the shadows, where they belong. At the start of a new week, I noticed a new girl at the office. Her name was Lily, and she seemed friendly enough at first. She was hired as an assistant to the executive team, so we didn't work directly together, but we often crossed paths in the break room or at meetings. At first, I didn't think much of her. She seemed to fit in well with the office crowd, always smiling and eager to help. But soon I started noticing some strange things. One Monday, I walked into the office and noticed Lily wearing the same dress I'd worn the previous week. I shrugged it off. After all, it was a popular brand, and maybe she just liked the style. But then it happened again and again, each time she wore an outfit that I had recently worn. At first, I thought it was just a weird coincidence, but then it started getting more personal. Lily began styling her hair just like mine, cutting it the same length and even using the same color. It was eerie, like she was trying to become my mirror image. My friends at work started joking about it, calling her Little Lucy, but to me, it wasn't funny. It was unnerving. I tried to talk to her about it, but she just laughed it off, saying I was being silly. Then I noticed she had started using the same perfume as me. Same brand, the same scent, my signature scent. Everywhere I went, there was Lily, leaving a trail of my perfume behind her. I began to feel uneasy. It was like she was trying to step into my skin, to erase my existence and replace me with herself. I tried to talk to my boss about it, but he just brushed it off, saying she probably just looked up to me. Things got worse. One morning, I walked into my office to find Lily sitting at my desk typing away on my computer. When I confronted her, she apologized and said she was just trying to help with some of my workload. I told her firmly to stay out of my space, but she didn't. The next day, I found a photo of her on my desk. It was a selfie she had taken in my office, sitting in my chair, with my nameplate in the foreground. She had left a note that simply read, "I look good here, don't I?" That was the last straw. I took the photo to HR and filed a complaint. They promised to look into it, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was about to happen. That night, I received a message on my personal phone. It was a video clip sent from an unknown number. The video showed me sitting at my desk, typing away. My heart pounded in my chest. How did she get my personal number? How long had she been watching me? I was terrified. I went to the police, but without any concrete evidence of a threat, there was little they could do. I decided to take a few days off work, hoping that some distance would make things better. But Lily wasn't done with me yet. The next morning, I woke up to find my car missing from the driveway. I called the police, and they found it parked outside Lily's apartment. My personal belongings scattered inside. She had taken my life and was now living it for herself. That was when I knew I had to take drastic action. I started documenting everything, every incident, every creepy encounter, every note and message. I set up cameras in my home and in my office to catch her in the act. Finally, one night, I got the evidence I needed. Cameras in my house caught her sneaking in, rifling through my closet and trying on my clothes. She even stood in front of my mirror, mimicking my expressions and gestures. Armed with the footage, I went back to the police and to HR. This time, they took me seriously. Lily was fired and arrested for stalking and harassment. I thought it was over, but the experience left a lasting scar. I moved to a new city, changed my phone number, and tried to rebuild my life. Even now, I'm still haunted by what happened. I'm always looking over my shoulder, always wondering if she's out there, watching, waiting for another chance to take over my life. Thanks for listening to my story. In the small town of Abbeville, Alabama, stories had been circulating for generations about an eerie figure that haunted the streets at night. The residents spoke of Hugging Molly, a ghost that wandered in the darkness and embraced innocent children in the stillness of the night. For many, it was just a scary story used to send children to bed early. But some believed there was more to the legend, that Hugging Molly truly existed and was searching for someone she had lost. Emily Johnson returned to her hometown of Abbeville after many years. After her grandmother's death, she inherited the old house on the outskirts of town. She had spent many summers there as a child, and returning felt like a journey into the past. During her childhood, Emily had heard many stories about Hugging Molly. Her grandmother often told them by the fireplace, while the wind howled through the trees outside. Emily remembered how she would always snuggle under a blanket when the stories became too scary. Now, as an adult, Emily saw things differently. She thought the stories were exaggerated and the town's fear unfounded. Yet deep inside, she felt a slight unease as she entered the old house. It was a chilly autumn evening when Emily moved into her new home. The air was fresh and the leaves rustled quietly in the wind. She settled into the house and found many mementos from her childhood that reminded her of better times. As darkness fell, Emily decided to take a walk through the town. The streets were quiet, and the full moon bathed everything in a silvery light. She felt nostalgic as she passed by familiar places, yet a part of her was also tense. As she wandered through the alleys, she suddenly heard footsteps behind her. She turned around, but there was no one there. The wind blew stronger, and Emily pulled her coat tighter around her. A cold shiver ran down her spine, as if someone were watching her. Back at the house, Emily tried to shake off the eerie feeling. She made herself some tea and sat with a book by the fireplace. The warmth of the flames soothed her, and soon she was engrossed in the story. Suddenly, there was a soft knock at the door. Emily jumped. The noise disrupted the peaceful silence of the house. She set the book aside and went to the door, but when she opened it, there was no one there. Only the wind howled through the trees. Confused and a little nervous, Emily closed the door and returned to the living room. But the feeling that something was wrong wouldn't leave her. She decided to go to bed, hoping that a night's sleep would free her from her worries. In the middle of the night, Emily was awakened by a strange sound. It was like the whispering of a woman, soft and haunting. She sat up, her heart pounding in her chest. The sound was coming from outside, right in front of her window. Emily crept to the window and peeked out. In the faint moonlight, she saw a figure standing in the garden. The woman was tall, wrapped in a black cloak, and was looking directly at her. Panic gripped Emily. She drew the curtains and sat back on the bed, gasping. Her mind raced. Was that Hugging Molly? Was the legend true? She tried to calm herself, telling herself it must have been just a dream, but the feeling of apprehension remained. She couldn't close her eyes again for the rest of the night as the wind howled against the house outside. The next morning, Emily was tired and exhausted. She decided to talk to some old acquaintances about the events of the night, hoping to learn more about the legend of Hugging Molly. In a small cafe in town, she met Mrs. Carter, who had lived in Abbeville for decades. Mrs. Carter was known for her stories and tales about the town. "Ah, Emily, back in town, huh?" Mrs. Carter said with a knowing smile as Emily sat down at the table with her. "How's life at the old Johnson house?" Emily hesitated for a moment before answering. I saw something strange last night. A woman in the garden in a black cloak." Mrs. Carter's face grew serious. "Hugging Molly. Many here believe she still wanders around. She's looking for children or for people who remind her of her lost child." Emily swallowed. "Do you believe she really exists?" Mrs. Carter shrugged. "I don't know, but many have spoken of encounters. Be careful, Emily." Emily thanked Mrs. Carter and left the cafe with mixed feelings. She felt watched, as if the whole town knew her story. Nevertheless, she decided not to be controlled by fear. She would find out what was really going on. Back at the house, Emily searched the attic for old family memories. Among the dusty boxes and suitcases, she found an old photo album. She flipped through the yellowed pages and came across a picture that made her pause. It showed her grandmother as a young woman next to another woman in a black cloak. On the back of the photo was written, "Molly and I, summer 1935. Emily couldn't believe it. Was this the famous Hugging Molly? Her hands trembled as she looked more closely at the photo. The woman looked happy, very different from the ghostly figure she had seen at night. Emily knew she had to find out more. She searched the town for clues about the identity of the woman in the photo. In the local library, she finally found an old newspaper article from 1935. The article told the story of a woman named Molly who was inconsolable after the loss of her child. In her grief, she began to roam the town at night, embracing children as if she were searching for her lost son. Some residents thought she was crazy. Others believed she was dangerous. Eventually, she disappeared one night without a trace, and the legend of Hugging Molly began. Emily felt sympathy for Molly, who was trapped in her grief. She now understood that the figure in the garden wasn't evil, but a soul seeking comfort. Following night, Emily decided to face her fear. She sat awake at the window, waiting for the figure to return. Her heart pounded in her chest, but she was determined to learn the truth. Again, she heard the whispering and saw the dark figure in the garden. This time, she opened the door and stepped out into the cold night. The moon cast its light on the woman, who looked at her without moving. "Molly," Emily said softly, taking a step toward the figure. "I know who you are, and I know you're suffering." The figure paused, her movement suddenly halting, as if surprised that someone was speaking to her so directly. Emily could see the woman's face more clearly now. It was old and lined with deep creases, but her eyes were full of sadness. "I'm not here to hurt you," Emily continued. "I want to help you find peace." The figure slowly nodded as if she understood Emily, and then, without another sound, she vanished into the darkness, back into the shadows of the night. The next morning, Emily found a letter in front of her door. The handwriting was old and shaky, as if written by someone who hadn't practiced in a long time. "Dear Emily," the letter began, "thank you. Your courage has helped me overcome my own fear. I was lost and didn't know how to find my peace. But through you, I've realized I can let go." Emily felt tears in her eyes as she read the letter. She knew that Molly had finally found peace, and that the legend of Hugging Molly now had a new meaning. It was a story of loss and grief, also of redemption and forgiveness. Emily stayed in Abbeville, the old house becoming her new home. The town's residents still talked about the legend of Hugging Molly, but Emily knew the truth behind the story was something different. Molly wasn't a danger, but a soul seeking comfort and understanding. Emily became involved in the community, helping children and families in need, and told Molly's story to promote compassion and understanding. She knew that Molly's spirit had now found rest, and that she had grown through her encounter with her. And so, the legend of Hugging Molly became a tale no longer associated with fear and horror, but with the hope of healing and peace. "I've never lived in a haunted house," James begins in a low, ominous voice. "But my mother lived there as a teenager, and the stories she brought back from that time are enough to send a shiver down anyone's spine." The street my mother lived on was called Whispering Pines, a seemingly peaceful name for a place that hid dark secrets. Strange occurrences were common there, an unsettling reminder that not all was as it seemed. One particular house, a few doors down from where she lived, harbored a tragedy that would forever alter its story. In the dead of night, the daughter of the family living in that house went to bed complaining of a terrible headache. She was a vibrant girl, full of life and laughter, but by morning her light had been snuffed out. An aneurysm, doctors said, cruel twist of fate that had stolen her away. Her sudden death left a void that echoed through the community, a grim shadow that hung over the house. To escape their grief, the family decided to leave town for a while, seeking solace far from the memories that haunted their every step. Before leaving, the father entrusted my uncle, my mom's brother, with the task of looking after their pets. It seemed like a simple enough favor, a chance to help a grieving family and care for their beloved animals. My mom and dad, who were dating at the time, accompanied my uncle on his errand. The house, though silent, seemed to breathe with an energy all its own. My mother, drawn by tales of a grand piano within, saw this as an opportunity to indulge her love for music. My dad, a veterinary student, was more interested in the animals. As they stepped inside, the air felt heavy, charged with an inexplicable tension. My uncle and dad descended to the basement, leaving my mother alone on the ground floor. The grand piano stood in the corner, its polished surface gleaming under the dim light. Eagerly, my mother sat down and let her fingers dance across the keys, filling the room with a haunting melody. For a moment, she lost herself in the music, the notes weaving a spell that seemed to chase away the shadows. Then, out of nowhere, she felt something brush against her ankles, a soft, almost tentative caress. Startled, she paused, glancing down with a nervous laugh. She assumed one of the cats had escaped from the basement, its curiosity bringing it to her feet. Shaking off the sensation, she resumed playing, her fingers trembling slightly. But the touch returned, this time firmer, as if a cold, invisible hand was reaching out from the shadows. Her heart began to race, a chill creeping up her spine. She leaned forward, peering under the piano, expecting to see a pair of feline eyes gleaming back at her. Nothing, only darkness stared back. Her heart pounding, she hesitated, a sense of unease curling around her like smoke. Gathering her courage, she pressed on, determined to finish the piece she had started. The next moment, everything changed. Icy fingers wrapped around her ankles, gripping them with a strength that sent terror searing through her veins. It was as if a child's hands had reached up from the depths, playful yet filled with a longing that transcended the grave. She screamed, the sound cutting through the air like a knife. Her instincts took over, and she bolted from the piano, her feet stumbling over each other in her haste. She dashed toward the basement door, her voice hoarse as she called for my uncle and dad, desperate for their presence. They emerged from the basement, alarm etched across their faces. My uncle was the first to reach her, taking in her pale face and wide eyes with growing concern. "What happened?" he demanded, fear threading through his words. Breathless, my mother recounted the chilling encounter, her voice quivering with the memory of the cold touch. As she spoke, my uncle's expression shifted from confusion to horror, his skin turning ashen. He exchanged a glance with my dad before revealing the truth. "The daughter who died," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "She used to play a game with her father. When he played the piano, she'd crawl underneath and grab his ankles, pushing his feet up and down on the pedals." The weight of his words settled over them, thick and suffocating. The spirit of the girl, her life cut tragically short, had reached out from beyond the veil. In death, she had mistaken my mother for her father, seeking to relive the moments of joy and connection that had defined her short life. The house, with its silent rooms and shadowed corners, now seemed to pulse with a presence that was both mournful and restless. My mother's encounter had peeled back the layers of time, revealing the thin boundary between the living and the dead. As they left the house, the air felt heavy with unspoken sorrow, the memories of what had transpired clinging to them like a second skin. My mother never returned to that house, nor did she ever again play the piano with the same carefree abandon. For those who dared to venture near, the house became a place of whispered legends and lingering fears. They spoke of ghostly melodies that drifted through the night, and the chilling caress of phantom hands that reached out from the shadows. The story of the haunted house on Whispering Pines remains a cautionary tale, a reminder that the past never truly leaves us. The tragic events and the spirit of a lost child continue to echo through the halls, weaving a haunting melody that transcends time. Even now, those who hear the story or walk by the house feel a shiver of unease, a prickling awareness that some spirits never rest. The boundaries between worlds blur, leaving behind traces of love, longing, and the enduring hope of connection. As James finishes the tale, a silence falls over the room, broken only by the distant notes of a piano, carried on the wind from a place where the living and the dead still dance in the shadows. Every town has its ghost stories, and every workplace has its legends. For the ambulance company where I used to work, that legend was Rig 12. Whispered about in hushed tones among the EMTs, it was known as the haunted ambulance. I never believed in those tales. Ghosts were the stuff of campfire stories and horror movies, not the real world. That all changed the night I had my own encounter with Rig 12. It was a quiet, uneventful night in a rural community. My partner and I were on the night shift, clock creeping toward 3 a.m. The world outside was cloaked in darkness, a heavy silence draping over everything like a blanket. The kind of silence that makes the hairs on the back of your neck stand up, even when there's nothing there. I was in the driver's seat, fighting off sleep, while my partner was slouched in the passenger seat, her eyes closed. We were both caught in that strange limbo between wakefulness and dreams, where reality blurs and anything feels possible. Then it happened. A voice, muffled and distant, broke through the quiet, pulling me back to the present. I thought it was my partner, talking in her sleep. Irritated, I mumbled something about trying to rest and closed my eyes again, willing myself back to that hazy twilight of half-sleep. But the voice returned, this time clearer, more insistent. A male voice, full of panic and fear. "Oh my God, am I dying?" it asked, each word slicing through the silence like a knife. Then came the sound of heavy breathing, ragged and desperate, filling the cab with an oppressive weight. My partner and I jerked upright, our eyes wide and alert. We exchanged a glance, confusion and fear mirrored in each other's eyes. The voice had come from the back, where the patients would be. But we were alone, or so we thought. For a moment we sat there, listening, our hearts pounding in our chests. The ambulance was silent again, the night swallowing up the sounds as if they had never been. Just when we thought we had imagined it, we heard another noise. A metallic click, followed by the unmistakable hiss of an oxygen bottle. I fumbled for the lights, my hands shaking as I flicked the switch. The interior of the ambulance was suddenly bright, chasing away the shadows, but not the sense of unease that clung to us. We scrambled out of the rig, our nerves on edge, adrenaline pumping through our veins. Outside, the air was crisp and cool, a stark contrast to the stifling atmosphere inside the ambulance. I half expected to see someone slinking away into the night, some prankster or transient who had climbed aboard while we were dozing, but the night was empty. Only movement, the gentle sway of trees in the breeze. We approached the rear doors cautiously, my partner and I exchanging another nervous glance before pulling them open. The interior was just as we had left it, the stretcher empty, the equipment neatly stowed. No sign of an intruder, no hint of the mysterious voice we had heard. I checked the oxygen bottles, expecting to find one open, leaking its precious air into the void. But both were closed, the gauges reading full. It didn't make sense. None of it did. Rig 12 had a reputation for strange occurrences. Stories circulated among the staff, each more outlandish than the last. Lights turning on and off by themselves, the radio crackling with static that sometimes formed into words, shadows that flickered in the periphery of vision. I had dismissed those stories as just that, stories. But now, standing in the chilly night air, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong with Rig 12. My partner and I clambered back inside, closing the doors firmly behind us, but sleep was a distant thought. The rest of the night passed slowly, each tick of the clock echoing loudly in the confined space. We tried to laugh it off, to convince ourselves that exhaustion had played tricks on our minds. But deep down, we knew what we had experienced was real. In the days that followed, I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. I began asking around, digging into the history of Rig 12. That's when I learned about the accident. Years ago, an EMT had died in the back of the ambulance. A freak incident, a collision on a foggy night. He hadn't made it. The more I learned, the more convinced I became that his spirit was still there, trapped in the ambulance, reliving his final moments over and over again. "Am I dying?" his voice had asked, echoing from the past into the present. To this day, Rig 12 remains a part of the fleet, its haunting reputation enduring among those who work there. Some refuse to take it out, citing mechanical issues or personal reason. Others, like me, can't shake the memory of what we heard that night. The haunted ambulance continues to serve, carrying its stories along with its passengers. A reminder that some spirits never rest. They linger, caught between worlds, reaching out for comfort or understanding in the only way they know how. And if you find yourself working the night shift, alone in the quiet darkness, keep an ear out. Listen carefully, for you might just hear the whispered words of Rig 12, carried on the wind like a ghostly lament. Some childhood memories are warm and comforting. Others, however, can chill you to the bone. One such memory has haunted me ever since I was 10 years old. A memory that refuses to fade away, no matter how hard I try to forget. It all began one night when I was a kid. I was woken up by the creak of my bedroom door slowly opening. At first, I thought it was just a dream. But then I felt the weight of someone sitting on my bed, the mattress sinking under their presence. A gentle graze on my leg made my heart race. I assumed it was my mom checking on me, as she sometimes did. But as I opened my eyes, expecting to see her comforting face, my heart stopped. Sitting at the foot of my bed was a boy about my age. But there was something horribly wrong. His eyes were empty, black sockets staring blankly into nothingness. The sight sent shivers down my spine, freezing me in place. My mind struggled to comprehend what I was seeing. He extended a hand toward me. In it, he held a small, mysterious box. I reached out instinctively, curiosity mingling with fear. But just as my fingers brushed the box, he pulled back. Frustration overcame my fear, and I demanded, "Give it." In that split second, I blinked, and when I opened my eyes again, he was gone. The room was just as it had been, silent and still, but the indentation where he had sat was still there. Chilling reminder that it wasn't just my imagination. 5 years passed. The memory of the eyeless boy lingered, a shadow on the edge of my mind. I had started dating a girl from school, and one evening she came over to do homework. Afterward, she lay down to take a nap while waiting for her parents to pick her up. When they arrived, I tried to wake her. She opened her eyes suddenly, wide with terror, and stared at a corner where the wall met the ceiling. She pointed, eyes wide, then drifted back to sleep. Confused, I shook her again until she was fully awake. I told her what she had done, and a haunted look crossed her face. "Up on the wall," she said, her voice barely a whisper. I saw a little boy with no eyes. He was there, in a Spider-Man pose, staring at me. Chills ran down my spine. I freaked out, realizing she had seen the same boy from my childhood. The same eyeless boy who had sat on my bed all those years ago. Another 5 years went by. I was still with the same girlfriend, and we now had a 2-year-old daughter. We were living in my parents' house, in my old room where it had all started. Life was busy, and the memory of the eyeless boy had faded, becoming just a story I told myself to rationalize the unexplainable. But then something strange began to happen. My daughter started waking up at the same time every night. I would hear her soft voice in the darkness, carrying on conversations with someone unseen. At first I thought nothing of it. Children have vivid imaginations after all. But after a while I noticed the conversation seemed eerily repetitive, like she was speaking to someone who answered back. One night I playfully asked her whom she was talking to. "It's a little boy," she said with innocent certainty. "He's nice. He's lost and looking for his mommy." Words froze my blood. I couldn't shake the feeling that the boy she described was the same one who had haunted my nights and those of my girlfriend. The same eyeless boy, now reaching out to my daughter. My daughter's nightly conversations continued for several months, an unsettling routine we could not break. The experience had become too real, too disturbing to ignore. I knew we couldn't stay in that house any longer, not with the eyeless boy seemingly woven into the fabric of its walls. Later that year, we moved into our own place, leaving behind the old house and its memories. The strange conversations stopped, and life gradually returned to normal. But I couldn't forget the feeling that we had been sharing our home with something, or someone, not entirely of this world. Even now, as I tell this story, I can't shake the feeling that the eyeless boy is still out there, searching for something, or someone he lost long ago. A part of me wonders if he was simply trying to reach out, find comfort in the presence of the living. The story of the eyeless boy remains a haunting reminder that some things defy explanation, lingering at the edges of our perception, waiting to be acknowledged. And if you ever feel the weight of someone sitting at the foot of your bed, or hear the whispered voice of a child in the night, remember that not all memories are left behind. Ghost stories often start with someone claiming not to believe in ghosts. I don't believe in ghosts, but, they say, as if to reassure themselves. Yet these tales inevitably pull us into a world where belief in the supernatural becomes the only explanation. A few years ago, I moved into a one-bedroom apartment in Melbourne, Australia. It was a quaint, old building from the 1930s, full of character and history. It was my first time living alone, and I was excited about my independence. But the excitement quickly faded into something far more sinister. I had been living there for a few months when I came home from work one evening. Exhausted, I walked into the bathroom and noticed something strange. A thick wooden board, which had covered a hole in the ceiling leading to a small attic, lay shattered on the floor in two pieces. The board was solid and heavy. It would have taken Bruce Lee to break it. I stood there, frozen with fear. Someone's up there for sure, I thought, my mind racing with possibilities. Had the landlord sent someone to fix the attic without telling me? The thought of someone lurking above me was terrifying. I emailed the landlord, attaching pictures of the broken board. My message had a hint of annoyance since she hadn't given me any warning about repairs. Her reply was swift and unsettling. "Please call me as soon as you can." When I called her, she sounded tense. She explained that the last two tenants had experienced the same thing. The board would break without explanation. She promised to have it replaced, and she did. A month passed, and I tried to push the strange incident from my mind. But then, one night at around 4 a.m., I woke up suddenly. Goosebumps covered my skin, and it felt like icy fingers were brushing against me. The room was silent, yet the air was thick with unease. Then I heard it, a dragging sound, slow and deliberate, coming from above my bed. It was as if someone was pulling a heavy sack across the floor. I lay there paralyzed with fear, convinced that someone was in the attic. There was no way an animal could make that sound. 5 minutes passed before I gathered the courage to move. I turned on the light, grabbed a cricket bat for protection, and headed to the bathroom. The board covering the attic hole was broken in two again, just like before. I felt sick to my stomach. The dragging noise stopped, but now I heard something else. Whispering. The sound drifted down from the attic, clear as day. It sounded like children's voices, repeating a chilling phrase. "It's your turn. It's your turn." I panicked, turning on every light in the apartment, desperately trying to make the place feel normal. But the whispers continued, echoing in my mind. It was 5 a.m., and darkness still enveloped the world outside. In a bid to distract myself, I turned on the TV. Suddenly a fuse blew, plunging the apartment back into darkness. From the kitchen, my pet budgie Dexter started squawking loudly, a sound I'd never heard before. It was as if he was being strangled, his cries echoing with terror. I bolted out of the apartment, clutching my car keys. I ran to my car and locked myself inside, waiting for the first light of dawn. Only when the sun began to rise and I saw people walking their dogs did I feel brave enough to return. I approached the apartment cautiously, noticing the front door was open. I tried to convince myself that in my panic I had forgotten to close it. I hurried to the kitchen to check on Dexter, but his cage was empty. A fresh wave of fear washed over me. All the windows were shut tight, so I searched every room. When I reached the bathroom, I heard splashing. I rushed inside to find Dexter half submerged in the toilet, struggling to stay afloat. I quickly pulled him out, washing and drying him with shaky hands. My mind spun with confusion and dread. How had he ended up there? At 8 a.m., I called the landlord, giving her a watered-down version of the night's events. She responded with a disturbing revelation. "Oh wow, you heard the whispering too." Despite the growing fear, I stayed in that apartment for another 18 months. Occasionally, I heard the whispers again, and twice more, the board covering the attic hole mysteriously moved. I tried to rationalize these experiences, but the eerie occurrences kept me on edge. Eventually, I moved out, hoping to leave the haunting memories behind. Yet the landlord recently contacted me, saying her new tenants wanted to speak with me about the strange happenings in the apartment. But I refused. Whatever lurks there is their problem now. This experience taught me that some places are deeply tied to the spirit world. The whispers from the attic, the dragging sounds, and the chilling presence of something unseen served as a reminder that we are never truly alone. There are forces we can't explain, lingering in the shadows, waiting for their turn to make themselves known. As I share this story, I can't help but wonder if the apartment's new residents hear the same whispers, feel the same chills. Whatever it was, it seemed to be waiting for someone to acknowledge its presence, to hear its message. And so, I leave it behind. A chapter of my life that will always be shrouded in mystery. A ghost story that started with disbelief but ended with an undeniable encounter with the unknown.